Greenland isn't being discussed because the United States suddenly wants territory. It's being discussed because the cost of protecting it finally showed up on someone's balance sheet, and Europe doesn't want to pay it. For years, this worked because nobody had to look too closely. Greenland sat inside Europe on paper, while the United States quietly handled the parts that actually mattered: surveillance, missile warning, space tracking, Arctic awareness. All of it funded, operated, and integrated by Washington. Europe kept sovereignty, America absorbed risk. That arrangement only holds as long as nothing stresses it. The Arctic is now stressed. Missiles don't fly the routes they used to. Submarines don't behave the way they did in the 1990s. China doesn't show up to research by accident. Russia leans north because it has fewer places left to lean. And Greenland sits directly under the shortest paths connecting all of that to North America. So when pressure arrived, the math became unavoidable. Here's who benefits. The United States benefits because it already owns the system. The sensors are American. The integration is American. The decision advantage is American. When something moves over the pole, Washington sees it first, processes it first, and decides first. That's control. Without ownership, without governance, without inheriting a frozen territory and a permanent bill. Greenland benefits because it keeps sovereignty without having to build or fund a defense architecture it could never afford. It gets security without industrialization, protection without becoming a militarized zone, and political cover by sitting inside alliances it didn't create. Now here's who bleeds. Europe bleeds because it never invested. Not in Arctic infrastructure, not in independent surveillance, not in meaningful Greenland development. Europe assumed stability would persist and treated Greenland like a map problem instead of a security one. That worked until it didn't. Denmark bleeds politically because it carries legal responsibility without operational control. It owns the territory, but it doesn't own the system that defends it. When pressure shows up, Denmark doesn't push back. It negotiates, because the alternative is exposure. And Europe as a bloc bleeds strategically because it's trapped between two bad options. Either let the US keep doing the work and accept the imbalance, or spend enormous sums building capabilities it should have built decades ago. One option costs influence. The other costs money Europe doesn't want to spend. That's why the conversation keeps drifting toward ownership. Not because ownership is the goal, but because ownership is how people avoid admitting failure. Look at the sequence. Pressure gets applied. Tariffs are mentioned. Markets react. Frameworks appear. Not frameworks for independence, frameworks for deeper access. That's not accidental. That's the system correcting for who actually carries the risk. And notice what never happens. Europe never says, "We'll take this from here." There's no independent Arctic defense plan, no surge in Greenland infrastructure, no European-funded sensor network to replace the American one, because replacing it would mean acknowledging how much Europe outsourced its security. The mining argument fits the same pattern. Greenland does have resources, but resources without roads, power, labor, and processing aren't wealth, they're talking points. Anyone serious about extraction knows this is a multi-decade, high-cost project in one of the harshest environments on Earth, which means the resource narrative isn't about supply. It's about future leverage, and leverage only matters if someone else is already exposed. Europe is exposed. So the US doesn't need to take Greenland. It doesn't need to buy it. It doesn't need to redraw borders. It already has what it wants: early warning, control of the information flow, and the ability to apply pressure without inheriting responsibility. That's asymmetric power, and it's working exactly as designed. Greenland isn't being taken from Europe. Europe is quietly conceding that it never secured it in the first place. That's why the debate feels endless, because admitting who benefits and who bleeds is harder than arguing about ownership. And once you see that, the headlines stop looking confusing and start looking inevitable.